since we're already talking about Dan Mullen a little bit, almost feels like we're talking about him behind his back. Why don't we talk about him straight up? Moving to Florida, that's another big hire in the SEC, and I don't think we're going to have time to cover Pruitt. Maybe we can touch on him a little bit when we talk about how we think the SEC East is going to shake out this year. But Dan Mullen going to Florida, it's an interesting move to me, and I want to talk about it from the recruiting angle. I don't think that Florida hired Mullen in mind because he's been able to do more with less at Mississippi State. But it looks like he might have to do that at Florida based on how they're recruiting right now. I mean, they're 29th right now in 247 rankings, 24/7 if you like it that way. No 5 stars, 5 4 stars, and I know big dogs walk late, but they're not really. It doesn't feel like they're in on that many top flight recruits with Mullen, and that was something that sort of plagued him at Mississippi State. It was a chicken and egg thing, like. Is he not recruiting at Mississippi State because Mississippi State isn't a place where kids want to go? Starkville versus Tuscaloosa. I think, they're probably going to pick Tuscaloosa. But, or is it a situation where Dan Mullen's just not a great recruiter? And if that's the case, when you bring him over to Florida, was the expectation that, okay, he's going to win because he can do more with less, plus he's going to get the classic top 5 Florida recruiting classes that they haven't been getting under Mac or previous seasons. I think they've been around the 11, 12, 13, 14 spot, which is great for the national, but not great in the SEC. So do we have another chicken and egg at Florida? And does it matter since he can do more with less and he's going to have more, at least a little bit more, at Florida than he had at Mississippi State? Doesn't matter. Is he going to be successful regardless?
I think he's going to be successful, but it will be interesting to see if he can turn around the recruiting and what they can do with it. Now, both of us, if you watch the show, you'll be shocked to learn that we weren't very high on Doug Nussmeier at Florida. The guy, the guy had not had a good track record anywhere he'd been, and both of us feel like he got a lot of mileage out of doing very well at Alabama with a couple teams that were probably exceptionally talented, that particularly the 2012 team that destroyed Notre Dame and really had no business being in some of the close games they were in, I think, if their offense had been the sort of power run game that it should have been all year, and it took them really to halftime of the Georgia game to figure that out. Mullins shouldn't have that problem. I mean, he's a good coach. He's going to find a good way to use his personnel, and I think he's going to turn it around fairly quickly. Now, I know the two of us aren't going to agree on this, but interestingly, I think Florida is the most likely surprise team in the SEC this year. And the reason I say that is I just feel like they were so misutilized last year, right? If you look at who they had and who they return, I don't know that Felipe Franks is a great quarterback, but they have Tyree Cleveland's a good receiver. Tony's a solid receiver. Getting Van Jefferson from Ole Miss is a really big deal. All of a sudden, they have one of the better receiving corps, it may be even the best receiving corps in the SEC East. They return their entire offensive line, and the most of the holes are on defense, where they did lose a lot of players, but that defense really underachieved last year anyway. So it's hard for me not to see them getting better. And I get they have a lot of losses, but this should be a better team. And I think Mullen might actually be able to get production out of an offense that hasn't been able to do anything in the past few years. And let's be honest with guys like Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow was a great player, but he wasn't an NFL talent quarterback. We've kind of learned that. And what Mullen was able to accomplish with Tebow was turn him into an absolute superstar. I'm not saying it wasn't that Tebow wasn't good. It's that Mullen had a real knack for figuring out where a guy's talents were, where their deficiencies were, and making the most out of what the guy is. Franks is a really good athlete. I think Franks has a lot of ability. He has some limitations running a standard offense at this point of his career. And I think Mullen's going to get a tremendous amount more out of him. And when you look at the amount of offensive talent, which again, I think very quietly, especially given that they're going to get Scarlett back, maybe the most talented offensive unit in the SEC East, which I feel like is getting really, really overlooked. I could see him being really good out of the gate. The problem, and I'll let you comment both ways, but the problem is is absolutely recruiting. I think the best Mullen ever did was something like 19th. I was looking at some old notes I had. He finished somewhere between 8th and 11th in the SEC from 2009 to 2013. He never. I don't think in his history he ever finished in the top half of the SEC in any at any point in Mississippi State recruiting rankings. And I know Mississippi State has a lot of issues with recruiting at a high level due to where they're at, geographic issues, but there's still a lot of talent in Mississippi between Alabama and Louisiana, and he never was able to clear that hurdle. Not just clear the hurdle, but he was never even really able to get an average recruiting class. I mean, literally, because you're below average. And that's always been my knock on the guy. And I always said, I think he's a really good coach, but if he doesn't ever overcome that, he's never going to take the next step. The question is, was that a limitation of Mississippi State or was it a limitation of Mullen? And I think, that ultimately is going to be the thing that determines his career at the University of Florida.
I think Dan Mullen coming into Florida is the opposite situation that we talked about with Moorhead at Mississippi State, in that he's coming into Florida in a situation that was in such shambles, and I don't know how it got this way, but it was in such shambles. I think Coach Mack just kind of lost that team, that I think there's some low-hanging fruit, easy wins, and when I say wins, not wins on the field, but just wins within the organization that he's going to be able to do that will represent wins on the field, that may not be something that indicates long-term what he's going to be, but in the short term of sort of easing the Florida Gators fans' pain from last season at 4-7, I think he's going to be able to do that. Look, they've replaced that they played Michigan and Florida State out of conference last year, which is admirable in its own right. And they go Charleston Southern, Colorado State. They've got the Florida State, and then they've got Idaho. So they've already got one baked-in win right there. We'll talk about it in the preview. But the other thing I want to note about Dan Mullen and one of the hurdles he's facing this year is something we saw the last couple of years at Florida that's been really bad, and it's still sort of lingering, and that's the off-the-field issues. I think long-term, he's the kind of guy that can get that in order. He did that at Mississippi State. Like, they didn't have a lot of off-the-field problems. But I am interested to see, like, the mentality is still there. They've had a ton of off the field problems this off season, this summer, including guys that aren't going to be there that he was probably counting on a little bit. So I think that might come into play. But it is interesting that you mentioned the quarterback whisperer sort of situation without even mentioning Dak Prescott, which I think is says a lot in and of itself. But also, he had a couple other quarterbacks at Mississippi State while he was there that were not good quarterbacks, that he got decent enough production out of them to have good, okay to good seasons, which does say a lot, because I do think that neutralizer for schools that have less talent is if you have a great quarterback, you can win more games than you should. So talk a little bit about offensive schemes. I agree with you. I actually think Felipe Franks has got, within the right scheme, has got some talent. So this is where, without talking about a third down drag from a slot receiver, let's talk about the instant shot in the butt just win that he's going to get, bringing in an offensive scheme and an offensive mindset that was just absolutely void in Florida for the last few years with Nussmeier. Compare and contrast, and we're going to talk about easy wins on and off the field. That's got to be one.
I think it is. You told me not to bring it up, so I won't really harp on specifically the slot drag. But Nussmeier was really, really, really bad about having his kind of go-to plays. In particular, there's certain plays that are man beaters in general, and he would try to run those in very predictable situations where he needed 4 yards, so he'd run a route that's a man beater that's 4-yard coverage. Slot drag is an example, and then the other team would know exactly what was coming and would often.
They don't even work in Madden 19 anymore, so I don't know. That's why he's probably no longer
right. And
working at Florida.
It honestly, and it seems like hyperbole, and I know it's incredibly critical, but I don't think Florida fans are really going to be too offended by it. It was like watching a guy try to play Madden and get frustrated, and you start calling the same play that you know is your go-to play over and over. And that's the kind of thing Nussmeier did. And shockingly, that doesn't work at this level of football. So having a guy like Mullen that actually has he has a coherent system, and he has an objective, and he has stuff he's trying to accomplish. And I watched Mullen, and you can Google it, and I know it's out there somewhere, but he gave a speech at the Mississippi State regarding statistics and his analytics that he put into play calling. And he does a tremendous amount of research, and his staff does, in determining what the odds are of a given play's success against certain formations, against certain down and distance, and he'll look at what the other team allows and what you've had success with yourself. So maybe the other team really struggles with stopping someone in a power run play in short yardage. Maybe they're really good against it. Maybe it's something you're great at. Maybe it's something you're terrible at. And he does a whole bunch of work before the game to figure out what all the tendencies are and what all the success rates are and failure rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Builds a game plan out of that, and that's how he has a play sheet in front of him that when he gets in a bad situation, he can look at the sheet and know, okay, against my team, against their team in this situation, these are 4 plays that are likely to have success based on my strengths and their weaknesses. I don't think Nussmeier did that, or if he did, I frankly don't think he was very good at it. And that could be an immediate shot in the arm, some sort of coherency, and the fact that there's a real, genuine plan going into every game. And I said several times last year, I felt like Mississippi State's offense was often running on paper clips and bubblegum because, like I talked about with Mixon in the Mississippi State preview, Mississippi State had a really bad secondary. So that was their Achilles heel last year. It'll be curious what it's like this year, but it put a lot of pressure on their offense. Now, their offense didn't have regular prototype receivers. They really didn't. They had kind of a mishmash of guys that were 6'5" and guys like Mixon that were, 5'9", and they found ways to get those guys in position to be successful. They'd find a matchup with their big receiver on a small corner. They'd take Mixon and get him on a safety that was not going to be agile enough to cover him, and he produced despite the fact that there was no real coherent offense that you would normally be able to create out of those players because he had a really good plan. That's what Mullen brings for you. And if you give Mullen pieces that are actually, good, legitimate pieces, he's going to be able to put together a really good team. We saw that in the past with Florida. I think a lot of Florida fans have to understand the fact that Urban Meyer has never been the same offensively without a great offensive coordinator. And he took him a long time to have the success he had with Mullen again at Ohio State. And then he had that with a guy named Tom Herman, who may himself be a great coach. So I think, I think it could be a really serious shot in the arm. I'm not going to say it's going to be a return to the glory days of Florida, under Meyer, which was a machine when that was going, a combination of exceptional recruiting under Meyer, really good detail-oriented program management from him, and then what was probably a really good offensive scheme and quarterback whisperer from Mullen. Little tough to produce that. I don't know that Mullen is, there's no sign that he's quite the recruiter that Meyer was, but there are very few that were. But I definitely think it's going to be an immediate improvement over what we saw the past few years.
Let's wrap up Mullen real quick. If we talk about the 4 sort of high-profile moves in the SEC with Jimbo Fisher and Dan Mullen and Moorhead at Mississippi State and Pruitt at Tennessee, where would you rank the Mullen hire in terms of improvement of where the program is? Where would you rank the Mullen hire amongst those 4 this season?
I think you have to rank it. I would say probably second or third. Probably second.
You can't go second or third when there's only 4.
Well, and that's what I was about to jump into, because one, I'm going to get on you because everybody forgets that Chad Morris exists, and I think that's a shame. What he did, and it's a bit of a tangent here, but Chad Morris made Clemson the Clemson they are today. He turned around SMU in the past few years. Everybody looks at this as a punt hire. I think that may be a drastic mistake. Now, I think Mullen is probably a better coach than Morris. He's certainly a lot more proven. I'd put Mullen at 2 behind Jimbo Fisher because, again, Jimbo Fisher, if you've got a coach that's repeatedly put out top 3 to 5 recruiting classes, that's won a national title, until you've actually accomplished those things, I don't think you can put a coach ahead of him, period. And Jimbo has accomplished things at that level. Love him or hate him, he has. And if you continue recruiting at the level Jimbo does, you're going to have success, even if you're just an average coach. But Mullen, I think, instantly brings stability. He's going to bring a lot of production out of what is a very talented team. Florida's going to get talent because of where they're at geographically and the history of the program. But out of the rest of them, what's funny to me is I think Moorhead's a really good coach, but it's bizarre to me that when people rank these, and you said the four coaches, one I do put Pruitt at the back of the list. A little bit of it's because a defensive coach I think has a harder time influencing the program. A little bit it's the position he's in, and I think he's a little less proven because he hasn't been coaching as long. But everybody gives Moorhead all this credit for what he did at Penn State. Even though he's barely out of high school, and everybody ignores Chad Morris, who had probably more success than Moorhead did as an offensive coordinator when Morris was at Clemson. Morris actually has the benefit of being an actual head coach at SMU, did turn around a program, and for some reason we view Morris as lesser than Moorhead. I think that's a mistake.
No, and it would be if we were talking about all the coaching changes, and we also didn't talk about Pruitt in our coverage, but I really meant in terms of fan expectations. I think Morris has a longer leash at Arkansas, and he can do sort of the long-term build there. But this year, I think there's going to be fan expectations. Like if Mississippi State goes 6-6. It's going to be bad. If Arkansas goes 6-6, I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. So I probably should have included him. He's actually my second favorite move this year, I think, in the whole country, behind Jimbo Fisher at A&M. So yeah. So where did you what was your official final landing place on Mullen?
I had him second, and my second, third was him and Morris. It's going to be tough for Morris to win in Arkansas, but I absolutely agree with you. Arkansas doesn't have the talent to compete, and I don't care who the coach is this year at a high level.
I think their fans know that.
Yeah,
too.
They do, and they, I think their fans. We know there are actually a fair number of Arkansas fans that have listened to the show. And I think they've appreciated the fact that we've been very honest, that we liked a lot of the things they were doing, but we also kept seeing warning signs that they were going to be non-competitive, and they were non-competitive. And they have a rebuilding job in front of them. But for the first time, I think there's direction there for them to be successful. But yeah, no, I mean, in terms of impact hires, guys that are going to turn the program around, it's going to be tough for Morris to do it in year one just because of where they're at in terms of talent. I totally buy that. But if you're talking just 2 or 3 years, I think Morris could do as much or more that Arkansas than Mullen or Jimbo Fisher are going to do at their respective universities.
I don't think, based on the comments, I don't think they appreciated it when we were saying it. Maybe hindsight, they appreciate it a little more.